is the software product. So we got rack and data center primarily, and then reporting tools. I mean, this is really about rack and stack stuff. So that's what I'm kind of focused on today. So our software is very much hierarchical, trying to allow you to replicate your as-built environment. What's my network look like? Let me document it, kind of thing. Oftentimes when you're doing that, one of the things you might be documenting, because you are networking folks, is probably a data center or a wiring closet. So in the case of somebody like a wiring closet, you may have a closet with one cabinet, or it might be multiple cabinets, whatever the case may be. Here I've got a few pictures of the cabinet. I've got the cabinet. I can drill down into the cabinet, the equipment, basically in the cabinet. And I'll talk about different kind of cabinets that we use. Not so much manufacturer model, that doesn't really matter. It's more about how you sort of represent those cabinets in our tool, different options you have, up to you, how you do it. But we are hierarchical, so you can see as I double click or drill down, you'll get into sort of different levels of detail in the tool. The one I'll focus on is third floor here. It's a building with multiple floors, but we'll get into cabinet elevations here. Because specifically, since this was or is about rack elevations, that's what this webinar is really about, rack and capacity sort of insight. You want to, obviously, with respect to racks, you want to know what you have, where you have it, and what's inside the rack, so you can do better planning, right? Capacity planning. So if somebody says, hey, we want to install this new switch or router for some new process that you're putting in, where are we going to put it? Do we have space? Do we have power? So on and so forth. Or maybe it's a replacement of a model. You're going from Cisco to Juniper. The Juniper, maybe it's bigger. Do we have room in the cabinet where the devices we're replacing? So on and so forth, right? So obviously you can do walk around. You can just get up and go, go down to the data center and just look and sort of document things on the fly and, figure things out. But sometimes that's easier said than done for different reasons, security, or, just it might be off site, things like that, right? So, it's nice if you do have documentation. If you have it, it's up to date, then you can go out and do some walking around, or you don't have to do walking around. You can just go look at your documentation. So you can double click a cabinet and actually see cabinet elevation with equipment in it. So, but with respect to netTerrain, how do we kind of handle this? What's a cabinet for us? So on and so forth. So cabinets for us are really just rectangles that you see on a diagram. This particular diagram you're looking at is just an uploaded diagram. I can right click and say upload background. Actually it'd be upload the background and put in a PNG image or an SVG or JPEG, whatever I happen to have available. I'm not drawing it in the tool, but without the background, you look something like this. You've got our objects, which come from our catalog on the right-hand side, and you basically just drag and drop things out into your project here. So I drag and drop an object out and it adds it. And then I can size it and things like that. I can also make this a default size, so when I drag it out again, it's the same size. So, but these would be the cabinets for us. They look like rectangles. You can technically change the size of them. I'm sizing them to fit my floor plan in this case. If you don't have a floor plan of your data center, your wiring closet, you could also obviously just drag and drop things in. You could, create your own, or you could put on a grid kind of thing on the left-hand side. You can turn a grid on. It's not going to work here because I'm using a background and I have some other things turned on. So, but we do have options for those things. You'll notice too in this view we've got different colors of cabinets. By default, when you drag a cabinet out, it's going to be green. Because we do have this thing called rack override, where basically a green cabinet represents 0 to 25%, yellow is 25 to 50. Well, what does that mean, 0 to 25%? Well, it depends on how you're viewing your cabinets. Right now, I'm viewing cabinets based on rack utilization, I think. I can check that by going to the diagram settings and looking on the left-hand side where it says rack overrides. So actually, I'm viewing it by power. I can switch to weight or back to rack units. So I'm going to leave it in rack unit mode. So this diagram, I'm just going to view my cabinets based on rack utilization. But what does that mean with respect to our cabinets? You know, a netTerrain cabinet per se. How do we sort of go about documenting things in netTerrain? And, you know, just see if it's the right fit. You know, there's other tools out there to do things differently. This is how we do things. We've got a collection of catalog objects on the right under racks where you drag an object out like I did before and it creates it. And then you get a rectangle, and I've sized the rectangle just to fit my floor plan or background image. So it's nice and tidy. You can name the object. So if you want to name it based on what's sort of underneath, or in my case, the background, you can choose to turn that on or not. That's up to you. That's just displayed information. But as far as rack utilization, how do we track that, or power or weight? Well, first of all, this cabinet, we do have different cabinet types. So like this particular cabinet is what we refer to as a single container cabinet. It's got the blue rectangle in the middle, which technically that's really your cabinet. The background is just an image that goes around it to make it look like a Dell or a Corning or Chatsworth or whatever it is manufacturer you guys use. But typically you'll have some numbers there so you can see how many rack units that you have for or available in the cabinet, in this case 42. And you've got some rack lines as well. Those actually, you can turn those off. I think over here you turn the rack lines off if you don't want to see them. I prefer them with the rack lines on personally. I think it's a nicer way to see things. So anyway, so this would be a 42U cabinet. So that's how much rack capacity I have, how many rack units available that I can take a device, drag and drop it, put it in place, and then it consumes those rack units as I start to build things out. And we'll talk about how it does the consumption here in a second. But another rack type for us might be a double or a multiple container rack, where I have, turn my background off for a second. In this case, I've got 1, 2, 3, actually 4 containers. 2 of the containers are to represent equipment you might put on the front or the back of the cabinet. So in the case of, you know, you might have your patch panels rack mounted on the back side, right? You might have a PDU that you're going to put in on the side of these cabinets. Then you've got your equipment in the cabinet. Of course, I have a PDU here also, but in this case, we calculate the rack units available, not on a single container, but on all the multiple containers, because they're all available for you to put equipment in. So in this case, this one's a 70 rack units left available. On the left, you can kind of see that. That's probably out of 80 rack units or so or more, because I had 4 containers. You could have a cabinet that is just a double rack. This one's actually an interesting type of rack where we call it a coupled rack, where you could have equipment on the front or the back, but it's going to consume the space on the opposite side. So if I put equipment on the back side, on the back of the rack, you actually consume space on the other side as well. That's to help consume those rack units so you don't have to put a dummy panel in or something like that. Because a lot of folks do put stuff on the, well, I shouldn't say a lot. Some people put equipment on the back side of a cabinet. They want to show that, but then you have all these rack unit space that technically you're never going to use. So you want to block those out in some way. So one way we do that is to simply create a different kind of rack, either a coupled rack, but you can also do something like a double container rack where you have a single container on the front, all 42 units available, and then you create a backside container that's, in this case, 4 rack units. So you can only put in the 42 plus the 4 rack units. If I do my math right, I'll probably end up with something like 46 rack units available, right? So as you decide you want to consume rack space on the front and or back, you can do that and consume that space. So how do we consume space? Well, as you put equipment into a cabinet, for instance, this particular cabinet, I'm going to go down and I'll put in a router and some switches and stuff like that. Grab and drag and drop. I'll put in just a big UPS or something. Yeah, it's probably not. Usually those are at the bottom. So, and then maybe put in a switch or something at the top, right? So if you look at the devices themselves, they're going to consume rack space. So I've got some 1 rack unit devices, got some 2, and this one here I think is 7 or 8 rack units. Another one that's I think 4. So the rack units themselves, if you add them all up based on the devices, when you look at this particular cabinet on the left, it says I've got 30 rack units available now for that cabinet. Now that may not be continuous space because you might have things in between. You can run reports to show you continuous space racks and things like that. I can show that in a minute. But on the left-hand side, it tells you available rack units. It also tells you power used versus power available for the cabinet. That's just basically what we do is we look at the devices in the cabinet and go, okay, here's a device. It's been applied 1100 watts to this device. Now, if that's the wrong number, you can go in there and change it. We usually put in some manufacturer spec number, and then you'll use that number for power consumption. So when you look at this, the power consumption in this case went down a little bit to 9200. So there's a lot of flexibility in our tool as far as like rack management. And then as far as reporting, rack utilization. For us, rack utilization, one way you get that is you can visually see rack utilization because again, on the left-hand side, you can look at your cabinet, all your cabinets, and you can say, show me all my cabinets by rack utilization percentage. And again, percentage-wise, if you're greater than 75%, the cabinet's going to be red. Pretty much, you're looking at full cabinets when they're red as far as rack override utilization goes. On the left-hand side, you could also switch out and say, oh, I'm going to view these by power because, we are calculating power for equipment as well. Or we can look at it by weight as well. So kind of up to you guys and how you do that. But so you have different options. I don't get a whole lot of people worried about weight anymore, to tell you the truth. Not with respect to cabinets, maybe personally, but rack and power, those are kind of the driving factors for most people. Now, those things are pretty much calculated based on the equipment you put into the cabinet as you consume space and power and things like that. Now, power is interesting because you may want to get more real-time power statistics from a device where we are getting it out of the box. We're just getting it from the device based on the manufacturer's spec. However, if you want to use our utilities as far as SNMP goes, you can grab more real-time data using the SNMP connector and pull data. So you're grabbing it on a regular basis, updating those power numbers, and you start to grab that over time and sort of see a trend on what's happening with power. Not just power, I mean, you could do it for other statistics as well, and it really comes down to the OIDs that you want to, but you guys can get a more fuller demo if you want to see some of those things in a little more detail. But back to sort of the cabinet and rack utilization. So we do have some reports built in. We've got what I refer to as sort of the management type reports, right? Some pie charts and bar charts and things like that. You got sort of summary reports, some asset reports, and so on. The data center capacity, these go back to individual racks. Views and diagrams. These sort of out of the box, and you'd fine tune these really for your environment, and you might change some of these around a little bit. Just depends on what you're sort of trying to do. Some of the other things you might take advantage of is a continuous rack report where you double click and it gives you the maximum continuous rack space per rack. A lot of these have double containers, free units and units in use type of thing. You got this thing called the rack finder where you can put in a couple values And then based on those values, you can say, oh, show me everything with at least 20 continuous rack units or 5 or whatever it happens to be. It takes a second to run, but it'll tell you free units and units in use. So free units, you can see which ones. You can sort these out as well. So those are things that are available to help you understand your environment, find information about your environment with respect to cabinets. So the manufacturer of the cabinet really doesn't matter to us because we're you know, whether it's a Dell cabinet or whether it's Chatsworth or whoever, it's really about, you know, those are really more, you know, what does the cabinet look like? But it's really about the rack units that we really care about is how many rack units are you tracking for a given cabinet. So as you know, start to put things in the cabinet, then you can place them in the actual rack position. These can be moved. You can actually incrementally do these in thirds also if you needed to. Most people are usually in the, I think in the, you know, particular number, but you can do that if you need to. So the rack tools, it's pretty flexible. You know, we have options with netTerrain, the software. You don't necessarily have to do racks. You don't have to license that part of the software really. Although I think now it's just part of DCIM or part of the netTerrain software. I don't know if we do it separate anymore. We used to, I think years ago or last year or something, but that's a sales question. Sorry, out of my wheelhouse a little bit. But if you have questions around licensing or just want to see a more detailed sort of demo of the software, please let us know. I'm going to go jump.
Hey, Jason.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Jason, there's a question about, I think they're asking for 3D views or a way to rotate or rack see front and back of devices.
Oh, yeah. So we are not a 3D tool. We don't show front and back in a single view. If you want to see the back plane of a device, I'm glad you brought this up because I didn't cover it. Devices for us are what we call modeled, where they're going to have a back plane with ports and cards or slots for cards and things like that. So you're not going to see like I was sort of showing here, and you can kind of see that as I built the cabinet out, especially for like a single container rack. Let me go back here. Sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit, but like when we look at a single container rack, as I start to add equipment, obviously there's no backside here, but it's a front elevation, shows you rack position and so on. But if you want to see the back plane of equipment, this is how you're going to see it. We're not a 3D tool where you rotate and all that. There's other tools that do that very well that are out there. That's their thing. You definitely want to check those out if that's, you know, if that's what you're looking for. So because you obviously want to get the thing that fits the best for what you're trying to document and do.
Since we're on this topic, Jason, that I know there wasn't a question yet, but one of the questions we do get a lot with these demos is our catalog. What are these catalog devices? Can you create your own objects, or how does that work with netTerrain?
Yeah, so we have a catalog of objects that we ship with the software. I think we're up to 22 or 23,000 now of racks, devices, cards, nodes. The majority are going to be devices and cards. I've got 15,000 here, but this is my old demo project, and I don't really update it with all the latest stuff. So when you get our software, you'd have all those things at your disposal. But what's really nice, we have two ways of getting new objects into the software. One, you can just go in and create it yourself, press add new, go through the process that we'll call modeling the device or rack or cabinet. Very easy to do, and you're done. Same with links. You can go create your own link type. It's very easy. You don't need to wait for us to do any of that stuff. It's fully documented. If you go over to networkdocumentation.com, you'll see all of our guides over there. You can check out all the guides. It's a lot of documentation on how to use our software. We also offer training and other things too. But the other thing too is we have import object type. If you are a customer, you can simply go into the help of the software, go to help, you log into support, and you just request a device type and say, hey, we need this device type. We just bought it. It's not in our catalog. Can you create it? And we'll create it and send it to you. We typically turn those around next day. We're pretty good about that, getting those out to you pretty quick. So